Peace and blessings, beautiful people, and welcome back to another edition of What is the Time, a podcast about celestial timing, personal sovereignty, and living where the getting is good. I am your boy Zamboni, and today I want to take y'all. It's been a little while since I told the story, so I think I want to do that again today. I think I want to talk about how the name Funk got into my name, because it is so very, very important. One time I went and saw an astrologer. I saw a Vedic astrologer, and one of the things that they do in that tradition is they'll it's like kind of numerological. They'll like add up the letters in your name in some kind of way. I don't know how it works. That's part of the reason why I was going to get a Vedic astrology reading, because I don't know what's happening there. I can be a terrible client sometimes if I go to a Western astrologer or somebody who does a similar thing to what I do, because I'll be like, that's not what that says, and I'm a terrible client. So I went to a Vedic astrologer, and I have no idea what she was doing, but one of the things that she did is she looked at my name and wanted to see how it all how auspicious the name was and this kind of thing. And so she saw that ZamboniFunk, and she was like, if you just take the funk off the end there, then you'll have a much more auspicious and beneficial, proficient, profitable kind of situation. And I was like, well, the funk is staying, so it's going to be what it's going to be. So, that funk is so deeply important to me. You'll notice that astrology doesn't even show up in my name at all. It doesn't show up in any of my handles or anything like that. And that's because funk to me is, it's the cosmic slop from which the whole universe is created. And so because I am so deeply engaged in rhythmic cycles of timing, then that includes astrology. And music isn't in my name either, but funk kind of refers to both of those things at the same time. And so I just wanted to talk about how I got to be this funky, how the whole thing happened. The truth is that I don't really know how I got to be funky in the first place. I came out this way. I didn't mean to be funky. I didn't realize that everybody wasn't as funky as this for a long time, but it's been a journey, you know what I mean? So here we go. I'm just going to talk about how my little origin story here, and all of the things that have happened that brought me to this place and in the Z-Funk situation. So in the first place, I started out as the churchiest youth in the whole world. I feel like I've told you about this before. There in the episode I did on Breathe, which is the breath exercise I made, I talked about my history and relationship with sacred music. And so when I was a child, I went into church and I was just I was sold. I knew that it was the truth. It was the most transcendent thing that I had ever experienced. And I didn't realize at that time that so much of that was based in the music. I was having these amazing spiritual experiences, in large part due to the music that I was exposed to at that time. Now there was a spirit of togetherness and community that was super important in that situation as well. I was going to a black church, and so there's a lot of history there. The whole struggle for black liberation is deeply bound up in the church and the way that the church operates. And there are many critiques that you can offer for that. You can always talk about how black people didn't begin as Christian people, but were rather given Christianity by their slave, by their captive, the ones who kept them captive, kept us captive. And so maybe, there's a lot to say there about that. But at the same time, we can think about how, that spiritual tradition, being as it may, it still gave a sense of liberation and togetherness and community that white people didn't even have access to, for real. I can think of, who was it who I heard this from the first time? Was it Fannie Lou Hamer? Might have been. Where there were several instances where people would be oh, what's up, bud? I don't think that's the place for you. Can you go somewhere else, please? I know. It's cute, and you want to hear the story too. I just don't think I think you're gonna freak me out. I think you're gonna, can you just, yeah. I know. Come get on the leaf. I know. Ugh. It doesn't have to be all of this. Just head the other way. There you go. Now you're thinking. There you go. Yeah. You see what's going on here. You see what's going on. Yeah, there we go. All right. There you go. Back into the woods with you. Not on my leg. Because you were gonna fuck around and get crushed, homie. That's not what I wanted. Okay. So I believe I was talking about Fannie Lou Hamer. I was talking about Black liberation and being in space with people. So there are many stories about people who would be at civil rights rallies, right? And so we can think about how, like, Martin Luther King, for example, was a preacher, and a bunch of shit was happening in churches. And so people would, and that's where like rallies would happen, and that's where speeches and stuff would happen as well. And so there would be these rallies where there would be people in the congregation sort of like listening to a speaker talk about freedom and the process for freedom and how and what we were actually going to do to, organizing bus boycotts and this kind of thing, for example, right? And so there are these stories about being in those spaces, in those situations in the evening time, and then white cops would come in. And there's this, and so we're talking about like the 50s and being involved in liberation struggle, and cops come in and they're strapped and they got weaponry, and they have a well-documented history of using it in terrible, terrible ways, right? And so there's a kind of fear that'll come over the crowd or the audience, and like everybody like sort of like gets scared, and so the police are there and they're like really just terrorizing people in a big way. And then somebody would break into song, and everybody knew the song, and so together they would sing the song, and in doing that, they would reclaim that space, and it would freak the cops out, and they didn't know how to deal with that, and so they would bounce. And so critiques of Christianity and all of the rest of it being whatever they are, the fact is that the church is an important part of the Black liberation struggle. It's an important part of American Black culture, and the fact is that as I was a youth, and I was always interested in this kind of thing. I like read a narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass when I was in like the 3rd grade or some shit. Like, who put this book into my hands where it's like, there's all these like whippings and terrible, terrible violence that takes place in that book. But, so I was always deeply interested in that. And so when I was there in the church, that was part of my lineage, you know what I mean? And I could feel that being part of my lineage. I've had a lot of sort of, like on my mom's side of the family, they're white and Native American, and they didn't really like me for, like in large part because I was the Black one in that side of the family or whatever. And so there's this kind of like a sense of abandonment on that side. But Black people never treated me that way. Black people always knew that I was one of them, that we were going to work together, that I was, like they always, Black people always wanted to impart their lineage, their wisdom, their knowledge, their cultural values, their norms, all of these kinds of things. That was immediately passed on to me, and I felt deeply rooted in that community when I was there in church. And part of that was being in the musical environment that it was. So, if you go to church in that environment, then so much of it is musical. Like there's music at the beginning, there's music in the middle, and there's only a bit in the middle there where while the sermon is taking place, where there's not any music. And then even like halfway through the sermon, then there's more music, and then at the end there's more music, and that'll sort of like take us out. So the whole thing is this sort of musical venture, and I didn't even realize that was taking place. I didn't realize how much of a like performance and how much of a show it was at the time, but I knew that I was having these transcendent experiences, and I knew that I was like super into the text and like the idea of preaching and the way that the preaching was happening and the whole thing. Like it really felt resonant and like home to me. And so I started out in that environment, and I began singing in the choir when I was around 8 years old or something like this, and they quickly moved me from the youth choir, which was big trash, as all youth choirs are, and moved me into the adult choir, where because I was serious about it, you know what I mean? And that's part of my thing. I'm just like kind of a serious person. And so so I got into the adult choir, and we were rehearsing regularly, you know what I mean? It would be like a rehearsal on Thursday, and it would be Bible study on Wednesday, and it would be church on Sunday. And so I was in it all the time and getting pretty good, you know, getting good at like taking direction from the music director, and singing on time and in key, and doing all the things that it took to like be in that space and to create that spirit of togetherness and feeling that has such an important place in the lineage. So that's where I started out. And I think I also mentioned in the Breathe podcast that I was really into gospel music and Kirk Franklin. And Kirk Franklin was like such a big deal to me. God's Property was a big deal at that moment. And Kirk Franklin went on to win a Grammy for a P-Funk song. He called it Stomp, but the beat was a straight bit from One Nation Under a Groove, which is a Parliament song. It's actually a Funkadelic song, same shit, whatever. And so that was a really important situation to me, and I loved it, right? And I was an extremely annoying youth. You like, you know, you could find me in the 6th grade, like trying to convert my friends to Christianity and all type of shit like that. It was not my best look necessarily, but I was deeply convicted by that space and in that moment, right? And so as I moved into high school, then shit started to get a little weird. I started to be exposed to like hippie shit, you know, for lack of a better term. And, you know, just like being around all these other type of views and you know, just like, and white people. And as I was there, then I met this dude in my Spanish class who wanted to sing a song for the talent show that we had coming up. And he needed a backup singer. And so I was ready to be his backup singer. And then it turned out that I was like a better showman than he was. And so I was going to be the lead singer. So he and I started a band, called that band Thunderclap Douglas and the 8-Track Groove. It was sort of like founded around me a little bit. And I had a big afro at the time. And so it was like, it was very, you know, like that was kind of like the thing that was going on there. And so he was playing the guitar, and I was gonna sing lead in that group. And we started a little band, and then the bass player in that band would just leave his instrument at our rehearsal space. So it was clear that he wasn't doing any work at home. He wasn't a very good player to begin with. And so it was, you know, we like ran into trouble with that. But I kept going to rehearsal. I cared deeply about it because I cared deeply about things. And so I just picked his instrument up and started learning how to play the bass. And so the whole time that I've been playing the bass, I've been playing and singing at the same time. I've been very annoyed about that also for the whole time. But, you know, it's just what I do. It's how I'm it's how I'm getting it across. And so I started out in that band. We did 2 albums. We didn't actually win the talent show. I think our best run, we got 2nd place. And it was fun, and I learned a lot about how to do it. At that same time, while I'm like picking the bass up and just kind of new to the thing, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll check this out. My uncle hands me a stack of records. And so in that stack of records, there's a bunch of like funk favorites. So we got the Brothers Johnson up in there. We got the Ohio Players. We got Confunction. It was a couple of Stanley Clarke joints. Herbie Hancock was in there. And most importantly, there was a bunch of P-Funk records. There was a bunch of Parliament records and Funkadelic, and Bootsy had a couple of appearances in there. And there was one Parliament record as well. And it was dope. It was like the funkiest shit I had ever heard in my life. I just couldn't wrap my head around the thing that was happening, and the mothership was landing, and the whole thing. So with Parliament, so I recognize that a lot of y'all probably don't know that much about Parliament Funkadelic. It's like their most famous song is "We Want the Funk, ba-da-ba-da-da-da, give up the funk, ow, we need the funk," right? So, and that is to my mind, not their best song at all, but it's maybe the one that gets the most radio play and this kind of thing. People know it. And so, and it's true that we want the funk, right? Give up the funk. Shout out to Kendrick Lamar also, who's what was it? The Black of the Berry made that reference there. And so I started having this stack of records and started just like listening to these records, super tough, just around and around. It was, especially Hardcore Jollies was one of my favorites, and it had Cosmic Slop on there. And so I started learning all of these tunes. Also, I started learning No Doubt tunes. I was really into like Tragic Kingdom in that moment. Also, highly recommend that record. And so I started learning all these bass lines from that and from all these different P-Funk joints. And I really got into this place where, so there's this, P-Funk is not just music. That's the thing that sort of separates it from Confunction or the Ohio Players or whatever. The Ohio Players and the Gap Band and Kool and the Gang and all that, they made some great albums, right? They made some good records. But Parliament not only was it Parliament and Funkadelic and Bootsy and the Horny Horns and Parlet and the Brides of Funkenstein, et cetera, et cetera. It's all these different bands that are all kind of like in the same universe. But there's also comic books that go with it. There's also television shows that went with it. They also had one of the Bootsy records had pop-out sunglasses that you could put on, like star sunglasses that would come out of the record, and so you could be in there with it. And so there's all these different avenues that really sort of, and then also this idea of like there's something fantastic about it. And like, so I hang out with a bunch of like wizardy types, right? And most of them are white. And so those folks really love Lord of the Rings, right? And they talk a lot about how Fairy is a real place and how Tolkien would go to Fairy in his like active imaginal space and witness what was happening there and then come back and write a story about it, right? And so that feeling is the same feeling that I have about Parliament Funkadelic. So, and I believe you that like Lord of the Rings is really good and is that thing. It's just like written for white people, and I'm just not the target audience for it. Same way, P-Funk is for black people, and I am the target audience for that shit. So the thing that wizards tend to say about Lord of the Rings, that's how I feel about Parliament Funkadelic. This whole universe, there's this whole imaginal situation where it's like, all right, so, it's like this idea of black people in space, which is, that's something that was brand new around that time. We're talking about Sun Ra is also on the scene, right? And apart from that, there's not too much else that's going on. This is it's now called Afrofuturism. At that time, it was just niggas in space. And so I was really into listening to that and getting into this imaginal space where there would be aliens who came to the earth, and those aliens knew about the secrets of the pyramids, for example, right? Like, how did pyramids get to be in the shape that they are? And they're carrying these super heavy stones and all this sort of stuff. Like, how did this happen? Well, aliens came and begat some secrets that the people then lost access to. But through the funk, you can get back into that and understand what is the one, right? And that really spoke to me on a really, really deep internal level. Like, it resonated in my bones in a very important way. So I'm really into that, and I'm playing the bass and singing in this group and like having a good time with all this, and we're like doing the stuff. And I moved on to, so then around the same time, I stopped being as Christian as I was to begin with, right? So I read this book, Daniel Quinn, by Daniel Quinn. It's called Ishmael. And so that book, which I haven't gone back to in a while, I don't know if it stands up, but it got me to ask some questions about my faith that I didn't necessarily know how to deal with. I didn't know how to square my politics with my religion, with my love for weed and LSD and making music in that kind of space. I just didn't know how to put it all together. And so I stopped being as Christian. Oh, I was also like experimenting with sort of queering my my basic appearance and this kind of thing. I started painting my nails and doing stuff like this, right? So it was, and it was, I never painted them black. It was always like purple and green and stuff like that. And so because I just love I love to do that. And that caused a rift in my family. So it was already just me and my dad. My mom had left a while back, and she took my brother with her. And so it was just me and my dad. It was just two black dudes. And my mom and my brother aren't black. And so it was just the two of us. And the church was so important to how we were sort of constituting our family identity. But as I moved away from understanding exactly how I could do the church and what Gordon White likes to call churchianity and this kind of like American version of Christianity, like I just like couldn't get with that. And around that same time we had stopped going to a black church and started going to a white church. And so I like really just couldn't feel the vibes in the same way. The music was whack. And so I stopped being as interested in church in that moment. And I sort of fell away from faith in general. So then I moved into this like deeply political, I started considering myself a leftist more than maybe anything else at that point, right? So I'm like reading up on Emma Goldman and the anarchist revolution during the Spanish Civil War, where like the anarchists took over Barcelona for how long was that? Like a year, 2 years, something like that, before they were crushed by Franco, and this kind of thing, right? So I like got really into sort of that modality and that way of seeing the world, but I never stopped wanting to do music. So I graduated high school. And having not won the talent show or whatever, and then went away to school, and I went to a white school in Northern Illinois where I just couldn't stop doing funk shit. And so I started a band there called the Funky Funky Freaks, and that was styled after Parliament Funkadelic. That was like, it was just basically I was trying to do P-Funk shit. So I had a big band. It was like 9 or 10 people in the band with horns and all this different stuff, and we threw house parties, and it would be all these chants, and we just bit a bunch of P-Funk stuff. We did like shit, goddamn, get off your ass and jam, and like shit like that, you know. It was a fun time. We threw some good house parties. It was a really enjoyable experience to do that. One time we were throwing this house party. And maybe, I don't know, we were like the biggest act in the in the area, you know what I mean? So we had maybe, I don't know, it couldn't have been more than maybe 250 people or something like that, but they're all packed into the living room, right? And so there's a whole bunch of people, just a mass of sweaty bodies. It was great. And so so we're like doing the shit, and we're going funking super hard, and people start to jump, and I could feel the floor bowing underneath all the weight of that. So I had to stop the show and tell people to stop jumping because we were gonna collapse the whole building. Like, we threw some good parties, you know what I mean? So we did that, and so I was really into, that's when I really got into Bootsy. So Bootsy is, he started out playing with James Brown, and then moved on to Parliament Funkadelic, where he started doing the star sunglasses and and all that sort of stuff, right? Most recently, he was involved with Silk Sonic, with Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak, and so that's kind of what he's known for, is being super funky and having this crazy ass voice and star sunglasses. And he also had a star bass, and so he did like these big, like crazy distorted bass solos and stuff like that, and I just ate that shit up. I loved it. And so I learned all of his tunes. There's a record of his called Live in Louisville that I had to pay like $85 for it, and I was super broke. I didn't have no money because I had this rift with my dad, right? And so my dad wasn't like it was just me. I was like just out on my own in the world, basically, at like 18, 19 years old. And so I didn't have any money, and I was, I was working 45 hours over the summer or something like that, and biking into work and all those kind of things, skipping meals and whatever. But I spent that $85 to get this Tokyo copy of Live in Louisville, and the shit changed my life. And so I learned the whole thing top to bottom, 70 minutes of just like the craziest bass you can imagine. And I got my money the first night. It was amazing. So I'm like just loving all the Bootsy shit. And you can, at this point, like you can go and listen to Can't Help Myself, and you can hear the bass solo in there and be like, oh, that came from Bootsy. But so we did, so I did all that stuff and went super hard with it, and so it became for me that P-Funk sort of like took the place of the faith that I had had before. So where before I had been super interested in, Jesus and, for lack of a better term, churchianity. I was evangelical and all this kind of stuff, right? Where I had been on that tip before, I moved into the P-Funk space. So the P-Funk space is this space that it's got its own language attached to it. And I remember I sent out a campus-wide email looking for singers for my band. And I wrote it in P-Funk language, and the trombone player came up to me after I sent it, and he was like, "Dog, you got to write this in English. Like, nobody understood what you said there." And I was like, "What are you talking about? This is totally intelligible." And I went back and looked at it, and I was like, "Oh, this makes total sense." And he was like, "No, it doesn't. Write it in English, dude." And so it was that kind of thing, right? Like, so I was so deep in that it was my favorite shit to do. So, and that's like, I was watching this documentary on P-Funk one time, and Fred Wesley, who is the trombone player, he used to play with James Brown and then went on to P-Funk and did some other things as well. But P-Funk is really where he like got famous. I was watching this documentary, and he was talking about meeting Bootsy for the first time. And Bootsy, what he said was like, that boy could hit a stick on the ground and it would be funky. There was just no keeping the funk from inside this dude, right? And so that is very much how I was. Like, funk was just happening all of the time. I was singing all the time. I was grooving all the time. I just couldn't stop. I would annoy people because I just couldn't stop the funk. It was just happening all the time. I remember one time, so now I'm back in Missouri where I'm from, and I have reconnected with this dude who I met in the 6th grade. And so while I was away at school, I got to be super funky with the Funky Freaks and all that. The Funky Freaks. Everybody say the Funky Freaks. It was a fun time. Came back to Missouri and hanging out there for a little while. It's probably like over the summer or something like that. And I don't have a memory of this, but my friend Kevin says that it was like a birthday party or something like that. And we went to this bowling alley, and we're there in the bowling alley. And he just noticed how like everything was just so funky with me. I just couldn't stop it. It was coming out all the time. And that was when he knew that like the funk couldn't be stopped when it was with me, right? So he and I went on to later. So once I came back from school, then he and I started a version of the Funky Freaks in Missouri. That didn't really take as well. I didn't have all the people around. I didn't have like the kind of, when you're at university, then everybody just kind of like lives there and they ain't got shit to do but smoke weed and listen to music anyway. And so that's like, we just did that with instruments in our hands. And so everybody was just kind of there together. Coming back into like real world dynamics where motherfuckers got jobs and all this, we didn't really have what it took to make that band happen. And so we played a couple of shows or whatever, but it like wasn't that good. And I was going through a bad breakup at that time and super sad about everything. I think I mentioned, and you can go back a couple of episodes and see about how I accidentally moved to NYC, right? So that's where I was at that moment. And so I got this cruise ship gig and made it out of town and was playing the bass on the cruise ship and all this. And that was a whole situation. It wasn't very good, but I made it through that. And then on the other side of that cruise ship, then I was living in New York City. So I'm there, I'm in Brooklyn, hanging out, trying to make my way, right? Don't know really what I'm doing, never planned to move to New York. So now I'm just here and I'm like, okay, well, so how are we gonna do this? What's up? So there was a studio in Midtown that was called Funkadelic. So obviously I was up in there all the time. So I'm checking out Funkadelic Studio. I'm trying to see what's going on with the people. So one thing about New York is that New York is not that funky. I didn't know that, but like New York is, like that's the birth of the cool and all this, right? So New York is very cool. They're like too cool for school in New York. So it would be this situation where funk is very much a Midwestern and Southern phenomenon. Like you get like, so Bootsy's from Ohio, for example. James Brown is from Ohio. And like there's this ability to get down in a real, genuine, authentic kind of way that New Yorkers kind of struggle with. New Yorkers want to be cool. They want to be cooler than everybody else is. They want to they're in the freshest gear and they fancy themselves trendsetters and this kind of thing, right? And so like there's this sense that everybody's looking, and so since everybody's looking, then I gotta like look a certain way and all this, right? And so whereas in the Midwest, which is where I'm from, like you don't really have that sense that like it's flyover country, right? Like nobody gives a shit. And so since nobody gives a shit, then you're sort of freer to get down. And so I was coming with that attitude, but I was in New York. And so there was all these like cool cats around, and some of them could play, and it's a jazz town, right? Like New York is very much there's like all the Harlem Renaissance and like, you know what I mean? Like jazz is such a big deal in New York. And so I found myself playing with all these players who would be like Robert Glasper type of players, you know what I mean? Like super intense with the harmony and playing all the notes and like doing like super amazing stuff, but it's not really dance music. It's music to listen to. It's music to get your head blown up by, you know what I mean? It's the difference between Lindy Hopin jazz music and bebop jazz music, right? Like that's kind of like we're all on the bebop side of things, where it's like all the notes are happening super quickly and like, listen to it and be amazed is kind of like what we were doing. So I was there in Funkadelic Studios not knowing how to do that because like my harmony game is fine. Speaking of Fred Wesley, he wrote a book called Sideman that was really big, a major influence for me. In that book, he said that he took a basic music theory class twice. I think he took the basic music theory class and then went to a different school and had to start over. And so he took the same basic music theory class another time. And then he got picked up by James Brown. And so he didn't finish school or any of that. And so he just had music theory 1 2 times in a row. And he said that that was the most important thing that he had ever done, and that he used those basics over and over and over as the horn arranger for these super major acts. And so I took music theory 1 while I was in school, and then I tutored someone who was in music theory 1 after that. And I was like, oh, I don't actually know how to do this like figured bass shit. Like I got A's in the classes or whatever, but then like it didn't stick. And so I went back and I took music theory 1 another time. And so I just did that thing that he recommended doing. And I would absolutely agree. I didn't even take music theory 2. I haven't gone past that, but just knowing how to construct a triad and and like some basics about like root motion and this kind of thing, like have served me so very, very, very well. It's so important. Just like a strong foundational knowledge. It's the very same with astrology. Like if you just hammer the shit out of the basics, you generate a good, strong foundation. You only really need 7 planets and a strong aspect theory, and you are golden. You can make some really good predictions this way. And so I did that, like generated a strong musical foundation by doing music theory in that way. And so, but my harmony game is not super tough. I don't know about extensions. Like if you put a sharp 11 on something, I'm gonna be like, okay, I guess, right? Like I know how to handle a triad. So I'm there in Funkadelic Studios with all these New York cats. and my timing is ill. My harmony game is not, but my timing is dope. And so I was up in there just like killing them. You know what I mean? Like that, I'm clearly the funkiest dude in the spot. I don't have any qualms about like going in there and just mopping the floor with these dudes, right? There's like a regular jam that happens all the time. It was every Friday, I think. And so I was up in there on a regular basis. People recognize me, and I'll go in there and kill for a little while. And so there was this one time that happened, and it was in the big room instead of in the little room. And I was like, oh, cool, we get to check out the big room. And so I like walk up in there, and I'm like feeling myself, right? And so I'm just, okay, whatever. And there's some bass player up there, and he's like kind of playing whatever it is. And I wait till the song get done. And so I go up there and like kind of kick him off a little aggressively. You know what I mean? Like, cause I know that I'm the baddest motherfucker in here. So like, get out my face, right? So I go up in there, and the drummer was wearing all purple. So I love purple. That's one of my favorite things. And it, you know, like the P-Funk thing is very purple. Like a lot of dudes love purple. Also astrology people really like purple. But so my man up there was wearing a purple shirt and a purple vest and purple pants and a purple Santa hat, right? And I was like, all right, that's nice. I'm seeing what you, like, I'm smelling what you're stepping in over there, dog. That's what's up. And so he's like, tip, 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 pat, bang. And it's just like the groove of death immediately. And I'm just like, oh, okay, that's what's up. And so I'm in there and I'm grooving with my man. I'm like, okay, this is the best dude I've seen in a little while. Let's see what's going on here. Let's see if he knows what he's talking about. So I switch up the groove a little bit, and I'm playing some P-Funk tunes. I'm playing my favorite P-Funk tunes. I played Do That Stuff, and I played Tear the Roof Off the Sucker, and I think I played, probably did Bop Gun, and probably did the Motor Booty Affair, and all these kinds of things. Just like, and I'm hitting all these different tunes, right? And he recognized all of them. He's like, oh, you want to do that one? All right. And he switched the groove up and hit it with me. And I'll be like, oh shit, dude, what's up? So we funking around and like having a good time, and then he asked me for Knee Deep, which is like it's one of these super famous Parliament songs, Funkadelic songs. It's like maybe more famous than Tear the Roof Off the Sucker is. And I didn't have it. I didn't know, I just never really got into that record that much. And so didn't have it. So kind of like, you know, had to finish the groove up a little bit. And then we're walking out to hang out for a little while. We're about to go take a little smoke break or whatever. And I'm walking past this sign on the wall. And so like this sign was on the wall when I was coming in too. I must have walked past it, but I didn't notice. And on this sign, it's like, yo, the drummer for Funkadelic is here tonight. You get to play with the drummer for Funkadelic. And I was like, what? I didn't know, this is the guy? I didn't know. I thought that I was the bad one. You know what I mean? So then we up in there in the spot and smoking and whatever. And it turns out that like, suddenly I'm surrounded by my heroes. I'm like, oh shit, I didn't know that it was like this. Like this is the P-Funk fam. Like, and it's very clear. Like once you get in the room, it's like, oh, it's legit in here. You know what I mean? Like everybody up in here, I'm not the funkiest dude in the room. I am like mildly funky relative to these dudes, right? So I am sitting up in there and then like, now I'm nervous and like freaking out and whatever. We go back in the next room and we like play for a little while longer or whatever. Have a nice night, right? So had a super lovely time, get to like make a little post about it. Oh shit, look at me playing Funkadelic, whatever. And then I got a call a little while later from Benzel, that's the drummer. He called me up, he was like, yo, we're about to do a couple of shows. Do you want to come and play the bass with us? And I was like, fuck yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to go play with Parliament Funkadelic. So he's like, all right, cool. Here's the dates. We're going to go at this time. I was like, great. What songs are we going to do? And he was like, oh, you know, the tunes, the ones that come up. I'm like, come on, dog. Like, which ones though? And he was like, yeah, you know, like the ones that come up. So if you don't know about Parliament Funkadelic, you might not know that they got like 30 albums. That's a lot of albums. I was not prepared for like this. So I'm at home and I'm like practicing. I'm trying to do all these tunes and I'm trying to like memorize everything and trying to, all right, like which ones are we probably going to do? They're calling, you know, deep cuts and all this. They're not playing Flashlight. They're not playing Tear the Roof Off the Sucker. They want to play the Golden Goose. they want to play Alice in My Fantasies and wild shit like that. I highly recommend checking out Alice in My Fantasies, by the way. So like, I don't know exactly. So when we get to the show, then I'm up there sweating. I don't know what, and like, I don't know which tunes we about to do. They calling tunes. I know a couple of them. They called up Alice in My Fantasies, and I was like, okay, I think I know this tune. I think all right. And so we did it, and we had to stop the show. We stopped. They got on the mic, apologized for how whack this fucking bass player is. He's new. We're sorry. Guitar player turns around and show me the bass line real slow. Okay, you got that? Now we gonna try it again. And then we like go through, we like play the tune or whatever, and I just died, just crash and burn so hard on that stage. I'm so embarrassed, I wanna cry. Oh my God, I can't believe it. You know, they're like, and then we get into the next room, we're like having a little smoke break or whatever, and they are just ribbing me so hard. And I just like, and that was that, you know, like we went out and finished the show or whatever, but it was tough, and I didn't get called back after that. But, you know, it goes on the resume. No matter what happens, I did play with them, and you know, that's part of what the game is. Sometimes you gotta get in there and you gotta suck. So that's what I did. So in that process, you know, and so I'm there in New York City, and I'm playing a lot and doing this kind of thing and sucking a lot. And I sucked when I was out on the cruise ship as well. Like, this was it was a common theme for a while, because like I came from a small pond, you know what I mean? And so then I was a big fish in a small pond, and then you move out to New York City and everybody's bad as hell, and I was not. So I just had to take a bunch of lumps, and like had to learn how to do my thing. That was where I was when I recorded Can't Help Myself. I had this idea for Can't Help Myself when I was in college, and just kind of like sat with it for a while. Then by some stroke of something that absolutely has to be called like divine intervention or magic or some shit like this. Like, I have no idea how this happened, but I was like looking through Craigslist, and somebody was like, hey, I need to learn how to use Logic. Logic is an audio recording software. And so this dude was like, yo, I need to learn how to use Logic. I need to record a song. If you got a song, I want to record your song. And I was like, dope, I got a song. So we went and we recorded most of Can't Help Myself in maybe 3 sessions or something like this. I ultimately then sat with that. I just had those recordings for like 8 years or something like that, and didn't actually get them done until I came back to Missouri a little while later. So I was, you know, so while I was there in New York, I also was living in Brooklyn, and so it's mad Jamaican people, it's mad West Indian people in Brooklyn. I was living in Bed-Stuy. It was like West Indian people on all sides. And so I got to know that kind of demographic and that kind of cultural situation. It was different from the American Black people that I was familiar with in Missouri and Ohio and this kind of thing, right? It's like a different vibe. People from Jamaica are different than people from Ohio. For example, Jamaican people think I'm white. That's not the only difference, but that's one that came up regularly. So I'm hanging out in New York with all these Jamaican people, and so that's how I learned how to do reggae music. They did not like my funk chops at all. Reggae bass and funk bass are very different, and so it took me a while to get on board with that and to figure out how to do it. And even now, I don't play reggae like a Jamaican player. My timing is a little too like on point. My pocket is super tough, but it's like not as laid back as a lot of reggae players want me to play. But it's what I do, and so and I am really like, I'm nice with memorizing. I'm actually not a very good reader when it comes to music or even English, if I'm being real. Like, I just don't read that good. I read fine, but you know, like not that good. Translating from the page to real life is kind of difficult for me. I'm much better in my ears. And so I just would like memorize a bunch of tunes, and because I had such a good memory and was good with knowing how to, and you know, this whole time from Thundercloud Douglas all the way through Funky Funky Freaks and whatever else, I like learned how to direct bands. I also, when I was at school, I used to sing in the Knox College choir, and there I had a choir director named Laura Lane, who was like big in the area. She was a big deal, probably still is a big deal in that area, and like very well-known choir director, and very good at turning 70 people who are in college into a transcendent musical experience. It was really amazing to work with her, and I'm very, very grateful that I had that opportunity. And I learned a lot about how to direct a musical outfit from her. And so throughout this whole time period, I'm like getting better and better at directing bands and this kind of thing, right? And so while I was there in New York, I started playing with Nando Griffiths. And so Nando Griffiths is like, he's had, I don't know, what, 6 or 7 #1 singles in Jamaica, which I didn't even know because he wasn't playing those tunes when I got with him. He was just like, just kind of some dude, and was like playing a couple of shows. He wanted me to play the bass with him. And then I got involved in that band, and he was an excellent singer, a really great songwriter, and a very poor musical director. He just like didn't know how to make the band even work. He would get distracted. We would spend all his time on our phones and shit like that. So, I became the director of that band. I was like, listen, Nando, I'm just gonna do this. And he was like, oh, thank you. So he and I started working together super seriously. And so I immediately fired everybody in his band. So it was just me and him, and like rehired a new band around the two of us. And the band got really good after that. And I learned how to direct and how to do stuff. And we started playing Can't Help Myself, and we started playing Thank You at that time. And so it was a really good situation for me to learn how to do my thing. And at that same time, while I was there in New York, that was the time where I started to drink ayahuasca and realized that the world was not as I had been sold it. So this whole time I've been kind of faithless, right? I don't know how to navigate my faith, and P-Funk was a super important part of like how I conceived of reality and the one and the cosmic slop and all of this, right? But like didn't really have a strong faith situation. So then I drank some ayahuasca, became aware that the world was not as I had imagined. I became aware that, and I also went to herb school while I was there in New York. And so I had an important experience there while I was in herb school, where we were out on a camping trip, and I realized that plants were friends and not resource. And so when I moved away from like, this plant is good for this malady, and started thinking about, oh, this plant is somebody. And then I drank some ayahuasca and was like, oh, that plant is, or that set of plants, you know, ayahuasca is not just one plant. There's the drink, at least, is like a concoction. There's a few different plants that go into it, chacruna and this kind of thing as well, right? But like, that plant is someone who can speak and who you can have like a dialogue with, a genuine interaction. The first ayahuasca journey that I had, I wanted some, I think I asked for that it would speak in a language that I could understand. And so I went through the journey and had a rough time. I was going through like a breakup and stuff in that moment, and was like having a tough time emotionally with that, and whatever, that's not really relevant to the story. But there was a moment where I was like, why does it have to be so hard to do the right thing in the world? Why does it have to be so hard to just like be a good person, and why is the world so hard? And I clearly heard, nigga, what the fuck else are you doing? And she was right. She was right. So I heard that, and it was she spoke in a language that I could clearly understand, you know? So I'm there, I'm like doing this reggae music super tough, and in that space I'm like getting more acquainted with Jah Rastafari, and which is another like Judeo-Christian kind of situation, right? The Rastaman them consider themselves to be one of the 12 tribes of Judah, and so it's like this is like, so I was sort of exposed to sacred music and sort of still in the vein of sacred music. I always thought that P-Funk was sacred music, even though we were saying shit goddamn and all that, right? Like that was the space where I found transcendent glory to be taking place. And so I did that. I was like involved in that space, and then drank some ayahuasca, and everything blew up, and I was like, oh shit, like the world is magic. There's all this stuff going on here. I'm like getting into astrology at this time. And then, so like, because music hadn't really been working, one of the issues about music is that you need other people to show up a lot of the time. If you want to have a band, then you need like 5 people to show up to the event space, and to show up to rehearsal, and like you once you start calculating your hourly wage at that kind of thing, it turns into ridiculous money. Like it turns into like $3 an hour or something like this, right? Like if we include transportation, if we include rehearsals at home, if we include together rehearsals, and like all of the like sound check and all this, the money is terrible. It's trash. I don't know what like Taylor Swift is making, right? Taylor Swift seems like she's making some money. I wasn't making Taylor Swift money. I was making $100 on a good night, not necessarily making $100. A lot of times, Nando came up out his pocket to make sure that the band was paid. Like we weren't making shit. So it was a real problem. And then I drink this ayahuasca, and I'm already sort of like on this little astrology journey. About like learning how to do astrology, and learning that like astrology might be a real thing, and then there might be some like utility in doing astrology readings and this kind of thing. And so what I found was I could do astrology by myself. I didn't need other people to show up. I didn't need to try to track down a keys player. I didn't need to try to show other people what the chords were and shout into the mic what the chords were on stage and this kind of thing, because everybody else wasn't doing their homework and this kind of thing, right? Like I didn't have to mess with any of that. All I had to do was be me and do what I was doing. So I got into astrology at that time, and I sort of thought that my music career was going to wrap up. I was like kind of sad about it, and was upset about that for a long time, and didn't really know how, and like never really gave it up, but like would have these periods of being like, man, I don't think this is gonna work and shit like that. Then 2020 happened, and the ZamboniFunk enterprise blew up in 2020. So it was a situation where I took advantage of a really good election and launched my website under a really magnificent election. And I also engraved a piece of gold with an image that of the sun. And the sun has imparted many, many wonderful blessings to me, including notoriety and viewership. People have been watching, right? And so people watch the videos that I make and this kind of thing. And so in 2020, George Floyd died, and there became this, there was like a big sentiment in the zeitgeist in that moment of like, how come all the astrologers I know are white women? Like what's the deal here? Are there any good black astrologers? And yes, there are many of us. And there was, like I made a couple of lists of like, oh, here are my favorite 5 black astrologers, go follow them. Who are your favorite black astrologers, and put them in the comments. And I got tagged a bunch of times and that sort of thing. And so for about a week or two, I was just like getting hundreds of new followers every day. It was crazy. But because I had been working for a while, I had been doing dailies for 3 years at that point already. I'd been doing weeklies for 2.5 years at that point. And so like, because I was already in regular production, once people started looking, then I was ready to handle that audience. And so I started getting a whole bunch of readings, and I started doing talks. I did a talk for Fresh Voices in Astrology, and I it became a situation where it was like I was getting some notoriety for what I was doing, and astrology was a much more lucrative endeavor than doing music was. And also at the same time, I lost all my gigs because 2020 was happening. So that was also, COVID pandemic times. And so nothing is open. Bars aren't open, show spaces, venues aren't open. And so this idea of like getting together and performing wasn't really happening. And so I lost my music work, but I gained a bunch of astrology work at that time. And so and that's still Saturn in Capricorn. And so that's the end of my Saturn return there. And so I saw that Saturn return as kind of like turning a corner into being an astrologer and not really doing the music thing as tough anymore. So, but 2020 was really hard on me. And, I did a whole podcast about this one time a little while ago, talking about that story. And so I ended up going to Costa Rica and drinking more ayahuasca and having a bunch of wild and crazy experiences there. One time there was an arson event. One time I was like, because it was my job to water the sacred plants, because in the summertime there, it's very bright and hot. And so new plants can burn up. And so one thing that you got to do is you gotta kind of baby and coddle the new sacred plants, especially. And so every day I would go, and so there was like a mountain you had to go up, and there was a medicine lodge at the top of the mountain where we would drink medicine, and then down the other side of that, then there was a stream that ran over there, and so you got to like go up and down with a bucket, and you fill up the water. And usually I would sing a song. I typically sang "Thank You," and there's another song that I would sing that I don't know if it's going to get recorded or not, but there was a song. And I would sing, I would sing a sacred song and a song of gratitude and fill up the water, and then go up and find each of the ayahuasca plants and just water it and sing the song and do that trip, 4 or 5 times under the bird songs as well. It was like a very important moment in my life. And so I was up there one morning, and I went up and was like, the lodge seems to be on fire. What's going on here? So I went back down and was like, yo, did you guys set the lodge on fire? Is this like some kind of ritual cleansing or something like this? And they were like, oh, you don't speak Spanish very good. Like, we thought you said fire. And I was like, yeah, you guys, it's on fire. And they were like, what? And so went up, we ran up there, and we saw that indeed there was a fire in the medicine lodge. And it turned out there was one of the neighbors that had set the fire. It turns out that I had been buying weed from that neighbor. So it was all very complicated. Everybody knew everybody. So anyway, so there was a bunch of shit like that happened while I was in Costa Rica. I have so many of these wild and crazy stories, like shit that would just happen. The jungle is a wild place, you know what I mean? And the rules are not the same in the jungle as they are like in the Midwest, right? Shit's different. So I was having all those kinds of experiences and whatever, and still doing astrology and, not doing music at all while I was there in Costa Rica. Didn't have a bass guitar with me. I did have some drums, and I played those drums and enchanted those drums even. I don't know if I told that story, but I don't need to do that right now. But mostly just didn't really do that much music except to sing and keep time a little bit. One time there was a time that this girl who was super serious with kung fu and shit. She did kung fu. And then, so one of the things that'll happen with ayahuasca sometimes is it'll people go crazy and they freak out and they don't necessarily remember it, but they'll scream and shout and thrash and stuff like this. And so this lady who's nice with kung fu is kicking shit and kicked a hole in the wall of the medicine lodge and shit like this. And so it took 4 of us to get on top of her and hold her down. So anyway, in another one of these moments where she's freaking out a little bit, she fell out of her hammock and then was she was in a sleeping bag. And so she was kind of tied up, but she was inchworming around and flailing a little bit. And she found herself in a bush. And so I was like, oh, I can't let you stay there. And so I went over to her because is there a snake in the bush? Is there some kind of critter? Neither one of them were gonna like that if they've met each other, you know what I mean, in that moment. So I was like, oh, you gotta come back in here. And so I'm hanging out with her, and then I clapped a little song for her to like, the idea being that like a regular rhythm that was circular, it was a 3 or a 6 rhythm, and so a regular circular rhythm would like help root and give her some gravity. In the morning she said that did help. It was hard to know, but because, you know, everybody's like in this dream space or whatever, but she said that it was helpful for her, and so that was really nice. And I sort of hold that memory fondly, of being able to sing that song and this kind of thing. But apart from that, I wasn't really doing music. I like thought that I had sort of like moved past that or whatever. Then shit got crazy in Costa Rica. Go check out the Costa Rica podcast to hear about that. And then I ended up back in Missouri. My mom was getting kind of sick and whatever, and so I was like trying to help. And one of the messages that came through with a bunch of the ayahuasca was that like there was lineage repair to be done, and like I needed to be involved in family stuff. And so I came back, got involved with family stuff. My uncle was super sick at that time as well, and he ended up dying, but we had a regular spiritual practice around that as well, and this kind of thing. And so while I was there, then I was like, well, shit, I'm like living with my mom or whatever. I got free rent. I'm like, this now or never. We can't help myself. I'm gonna make this shit happen. So I did, and Can't Help Myself came out. And then like the whole family situation kind of fell apart a little bit too, but Can't Help Myself did come out. And then as I was involved in that project, and I was working really hard on Thank You as well, and Thank You should be coming out now in about a month's time, which is why I'm telling this story now, because you're gonna smell the pee all over it. It's like it's real P-Funk shit. But so, I was so excited about doing music that I was like, oh, I like kind of got to rededicate to that craft. And so I started getting involved more. And so since I was back in town, I reconnected with Kevin also, who is the drummer from the Funky Funky Freaks from way back when, who I went to middle school with and whatnot, right? So he and I reconnected, and we used to like ride the bus together and all this. He and I were both like skinny and kind of small in middle school, and we would ride the bus, and at the back of the bus, you would get terrorized by motherfuckers who who hated being in school and didn't want to follow rules, and end of the day and all that, they was rowdy and all that, right? So me and Kevin didn't need any of that bullshit. And so we would sit together at the front of the bus and have a whole different vibe. One of the things that I told a story before, Kevin tells a story, and I don't remember it. One of the stories that I remember about Kevin that he doesn't remember is I've always preferred dudes who were supportive. Like there's kind of a thing about dudes where they like kind of rib each other and like talk shit on each other, or they're very insulting, and that's how they bond and stuff like that. I've never really been into that, and so I've always preferred a more supportive kind of situation. I like came from a single father family. My dad is really close with his dad. My mom is really close with her dad. Like there's a lot of strong father figures in my lineage and in my experience. And so so I've always been sort of like into that kind of like Mr. Mom kind of situation, right? And this has been true with my best friends as well, that they're generally like a more supportive kind of situation. So Kevin, so we're 7th grade or something like this, we're sitting at the front of the bus, and he and I are having a breath holding contest, right? And so I don't know, I guess I was like winning a couple of times or something like this. And so I was holding my breath, and he cheated. He like kept doing this and like let his breath out and like put his breath back up, so I didn't notice. And like I was going and just couldn't make it. I was like, man, you really got me that time. And he immediately confessed, and he was like, no, I thought that you could do better. And so I just pretended like I was still holding my breath to see how long you could do it. And then I like made a record time or something like that. It was very cute, right? Like he's always been super supportive. And so he and I reconnected, and I reconnected also with this dude I had given a bass lesson to a little while back, and we started a little band. And so now we have this band. And so now we are like practicing regularly, and we're doing funk and mostly reggae. Actually, we do a lot of reggae music, as well as my original tunes, which could be called funk, could be called reggae. I do me, which is a very unique thing. But as we were working on that, we worked for maybe a year and a half together. And then finally, one of the roommates of the people in the band, he was doing a video capstone for his university, like he was going to graduate from the university in town. And so he was like, yo, like, what if we could I do a video about you and do a documentary? And I was like, fuck yeah, dude. And so he effectively spent several thousands of his own dollars. I don't know what his FAFSA situation is like or whatever, but like he did that to make a documentary about me. And so he like brought a film crew and super fancy lights and super fancy cameras and shot the shit in 6K and like just super amazing stuff. And so we ended up making a video of the tunes that we had been doing at that point. So Can't Help Myself is there, Thank You is there, and then a few covers are in there as well. And then we also did a documentary where we talked about a bunch of my sort of like upbringing and how I became ZamboniFunk and how like that happened. Now that whole thing was maybe 14 minutes long or something like that. And so I wanted to tell the story in depth, but that's how we got here. And so that is getting ready to come out this summer. I'm so very excited about it. It's going down. I've got so much coming out this summer. We've got that, which is music. So there's going to be an album. There's video that's going to go with that album. There's a documentary that's going to go with that album. We don't know when that's going to come out because we got to shop it around to the film festival circuit a little bit and see if that can get in there somewhere. It's good. I think I think it has a chance of getting in. But that'll delay things, and so the documentary might not come out for a little while. Then I've got the studio version of Thank You that I've been working on for very long. That was originally supposed to come out with Can't Help Myself, and then I ran into a million struggles with it, but finally that's about to come out. The mix is sounding really, really good. And there's a whole next surprise project that I'm not even going to talk about yet that is also going to come out. So I'm going into hot girl summer here. So it's about to be funky, and I hope that you will enjoy. Thank you so much for sitting through all of this and listening to me tell my story. I've even told a bunch of this story a few different times, but thanks for sitting through it and hearing what I've got to say. And I hope you'll check out the music and funk along with me at home. Appreciate y'all. I'll see you next time.